The silence was deafening, not the kind of silence that comes from a studio audience holding its breath during a tense moment, but something deeper, something that had been building for 3 years, carried in the heart of a 16-year-old girl who sat in the third row of the Family Feud audience, her dark eyes fixed on Steve Harvey as he worked the crowd with his signature charm. Maya Rodriguez hadn't spoken a word in 3 years. Not since the night that changed everything. Not since the accident that took her father and left her mother, Carmen, struggling to rebuild their shattered world one day at a time. The doctors had called it selective mutism, brought on by trauma. Carmen called it heartbreak. That ran too deep for words, but Carmen Rodriguez was a fighter. She'd raised Maya as a single mother after her husband died, working double shifts at the hospital while studying for her nursing degree. She'd tried everything: therapy, support groups, specialists from 3 different states. Nothing had brought back her daughter's voice. Nothing except hope. The kind of hope that made her apply to be on Family Feud, believing somehow that laughter might be the key to unlocking what grief had sealed away. The studio buzzed with energy as it always did during tapings. Golden lights bathed the familiar set, while Steve Harvey, resplendent in his navy blue suit, commanded the stage with the ease of a man who'd been making people laugh for decades. The Rodriguez family stood at their podium: Carmen, her sister Rosa, Rosa's twin teenage daughters, and Maya's older brother Carlos, home from college for this moment. Maya had insisted on coming, though she wouldn't be playing. At 16, she was old enough to participate, but Carmen had gently suggested she might prefer to watch from the audience. Maya had nodded, as she did for most things now, her communication limited to gestures, nods, and the occasional written note when absolutely necessary. "Now tell me about this beautiful family," Steve said during introductions, his warm smile encompassing the Rodriguez podium. Carmen stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "We're the Rodriguez family from Phoenix, Arizona," she said. "I'm Carmen, and this is my sister Rosa, her daughters Isabella and Sofia, and my son Carlos." She paused, glancing toward the audience where Maya sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "And that's my daughter Maya in the audience. She's our biggest supporter." Steve followed Carmen's gaze and spotted Maya immediately. There was something about quiet kids that always drew his attention. Maybe it reminded him of his own childhood, or maybe it was the way they seemed to carry wisdom beyond their years. He raised his hand and waved in Maya's direction. "Hey there, Maya," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the studio. "You rooting for your family today?" The audience turned to look at Maya. Hundreds of faces suddenly focused on her. In that moment, something flickered across her features. Not quite panic, but the kind of tension that comes from unexpected attention. She managed a small wave back, her lips curved in what might have been a smile. The game began with its usual energy. The Rodriguez family was competing against the Thompson family from Atlanta, and both sides were sharp, quick with answers that kept the scoreboard climbing. Carmen proved to be particularly good at reading the surveys, while Carlos brought the kind of competitive spirit that made for great television. Steve was in his element, working between the families with jokes and commentary that had the audience laughing. But every so often, during commercial breaks, or while waiting for the board to reveal answers, his gaze would drift to Maya in the audience. There was something about her stillness that stood out in a room full of animated energy. It was during the 4th round that everything changed. The question was simple enough. Name something a parent does that embarrasses their teenager. The Rodriguez family was ahead by a significant margin, and the mood was light. Carmen had just given the number 1 answer. Calls them by their baby name in public, and the family was celebrating. Steve was setting up his next joke when he noticed movement in the audience. Maya had stood up from her seat, not dramatically, but with the kind of quiet determination that somehow commanded attention despite its subtlety. She began making her way toward the aisle, moving slowly but purposefully. "Whoa there, sweetheart," Steve said, noticing her approach. "Where you going?" "The bathroom's that way." He pointed in the opposite direction, eliciting chuckles from the audience. But Maya didn't stop. She continued down the aisle toward the stage, her dark hair catching the studio lights, her expression serious in a way that made Steve's smile falter slightly. The cameras, trained to follow any unexpected movement, swung toward her. Carmen, still at her podium, called out softly, "Maya, honey, what are you doing?" Maya reached the edge of the stage area, but didn't try to climb up. Instead, she stopped and looked directly at Steve Harvey. The studio had grown quieter, not silent, but there was a shift in the energy that everyone could feel. Steve, his instincts honed by decades of live television, walked to the edge of the stage, closest to where Maya stood. He was still smiling, but there was something more careful in his expression now. The way adults look at children when they sense something important is happening. "What's going on, baby girl?" Steve asked gently, his voice carrying just enough volume for his microphone to pick up. "You okay?" Maya looked up at him, and for a moment, the thousands of watts of studio lighting, the cameras, audience, the competing families, all of it seemed to fade away. It was just a 16-year-old girl and a man who had built his career on understanding people, on knowing when to be funny and when to be real. And then Maya opened her mouth and spoke. "Thank you for making my mom smile again." The words were soft, barely above a whisper, but in the relative quiet of the studio, they carried like thunder. Steve's eyes widened, his mouth falling open slightly. The audience began to react, gasps, small sounds of surprise and emotion. But it was Carmen's reaction that truly stopped everything. She was crying. Not the gentle tears of a proud mother, but the kind of sobbing that comes from 3 years of stored-up hope and heartbreak. Her sister Rosa immediately moved to support her, but Carmen's eyes were fixed on her daughter, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. "Maya?" Carmen whispered, her voice cracking on her daughter's name. Steve Harvey, who had faced every possible scenario a game show could throw at him, found himself in completely uncharted territory. He looked down at Maya, then over at Carmen, then back at Maya, trying to process what had just happened. "Did you just—" Steve started, then stopped himself. He handed his microphone to a nearby producer and jumped down from the stage, landing gracefully despite his dress shoes and fitted suit. The action sent a ripple of surprise through the studio. Now at Maya's level, Steve knelt down so he could look directly into her eyes. "Maya," he said, his voice gentle but clear, "how long has it been since you talked?" Maya looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was still quiet, but stronger than before. 3 years, she said. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. The specificity of her answer hit everyone in the studio like a physical force. This wasn't just selective mutism or teenage rebellion. This was someone who had been counting every day of silence, who knew exactly how long she'd been carrying this weight. Steve's expression shifted completely. The entertainer mask fell away, replaced by something raw and human. "What happened 3 years ago, sweetheart?" "My daddy died," Maya said simply. "In a car accident. And I stopped talking because I said mean things to him. The last time I saw him, I told him I hated him because he wouldn't let me go to a sleepover. And then he died, and those were the last words I said to him." The studio had gone completely silent now. Even the production crew had stopped moving. Steve Harvey, the man who had made a career out of having the right words for every situation, was speechless. "Oh, baby girl," he whispered, and without hesitation, he pulled Maya into a hug. It wasn't a quick camera-friendly embrace. It was the kind of hug a father gives a daughter, protective and all-encompassing. Maya, who had been holding herself so carefully for 3 years, finally broke. The tears came in waves, and with them, words began to pour out. "I miss him so much," she sobbed into Steve's shoulder. "And I miss talking to my mom. She's been so sad, and she tries to hide it, but I see her crying when she thinks I'm asleep. She works so hard to take care of us, and I know she thinks it's her fault that I stopped talking. But it's not. It's mine. It's all my fault." Steve held her tighter, his own eyes filling with tears. Over Maya's shoulder, he could see Carmen starting to move toward them, but he held up a gentle hand, asking her to wait a moment. "Maya," Steve said, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes, "listen to me very carefully. Your daddy's death was not your fault. Not even a little bit. You know how I know that?" Maya shook her head, tears still streaming down her face. Because daddies love their babies no matter what words get said in anger. Your daddy knew you loved him. He knew those weren't your real feelings. And, baby girl, he would be so proud of you right now for finding your voice again. But what if he's still mad at me? Maya whispered. Steve smiled through his own tears. Sweetheart, your daddy isn't mad at you. He's been waiting for you to forgive yourself. And today, right here, that's what you're doing. He stood up slowly, still keeping one hand on Maya's shoulder, and turned to address the studio. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice thick with emotion, we just witnessed something that's a lot more important than any game show. We just watched a young lady find her courage again. The applause that erupted was unlike anything the Family Feud studio had ever heard. It wasn't the polite, prompted applause of television audiences. It was organic, emotional, the kind of response that comes from witnessing something genuinely miraculous. Carmen could no longer stay back. She rushed toward her daughter, and Maya met her halfway, the two of them embracing in a way they hadn't been able to for 3 years. I'm sorry, Mama, Maya said, her voice clear and strong now. I'm so sorry I couldn't talk to you. I wanted to tell you every day how much I love you, how proud I am of you, how you're the strongest person I know. Carmen was sobbing now, holding her daughter's face in her hands. Baby, you have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. I love you so much, and I've been waiting for your voice to come back when it was ready. I'm just so proud of you. Steve watched this reunion and then did something unprecedented. He walked over to both families still standing at their podiums. Thompson family, Rodriguez family, he said, I need to ask you something. Would you mind if we did something different today? Would you mind if we called this game a tie and both families went home winners? Because what we just witnessed, a young lady finding her voice again, a mother getting her daughter back, that's worth more than any prize we could give away. Both families immediately agreed. The Thompson family patriarch even suggesting they donate their winnings to speech therapy programs for children with trauma. The gesture was so genuine, so in keeping with the spirit of what had just happened, that Steve announced they'd match the donation from the show. But Maya wasn't finished. She walked back to where Steve stood and looked up at him with eyes that were clearer than they'd been in years. Mr. Steve, she said, can I tell you something else? Anything, baby girl. I watch your show every day with my mom. It's the only time I see her really laugh anymore. When she watches you make other people happy, it makes her happy too. And even though I couldn't talk, I could see how much joy it brought her. You've been taking care of my mom when I couldn't. Thank you for that. Steve Harvey, who had spent decades perfecting his on-camera composure, completely broke down. He knelt back down and took Maya's hands in. Sweetheart, he said, your voice is the most beautiful sound I've ever heard on this stage, and your heart is even more beautiful. Your mama raised an incredible young woman. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his business card, the same one he'd carried for years, but rarely gave out personally. Maya, I want you to have this, he said, pressing the card into her hands. And I want you to promise me something. Anytime you feel like those words are getting stuck again, anytime you need someone to remind you how special you are, you call me, okay? That's my personal number, and I mean it. Maya nodded, clutching the card carefully. And one more thing, Steve said, beginning to remove his suit jacket. This jacket has been with me through a lot of shows. A lot of laughter, a lot of good moments. I want you to have it as a reminder that your voice matters, that your words have power, and that you never have to be silent again, unless you choose to be. He draped the jacket over Maya's shoulders. It was enormous on her slight frame, hanging past her knees like a robe, but she wore it with dignity. The episode that aired 3 months later became the highest-rated Family Feud episode in the show's history. Not because of the game or the competition, but because viewers witnessed something real, something that reminded them of the power of human connection and resilience. Maya returned to school the following Monday and slowly began talking to her classmates and teachers. It wasn't easy. 3 years of silence doesn't disappear overnight, but with therapy and her family's support, she found her way back to the world of spoken words. Carmen kept a recording of that episode on her phone, watching it whenever she needed a reminder that miracles still happen, that love can overcome trauma, and that sometimes the most powerful moments occur when we least expect them. Steve Harvey never asked for his jacket back. 6 months later, Maya wore it to her high school's talent show, where she performed a spoken-word piece about grief, healing, and the courage to speak again. The piece ended with the words, "My voice was never really gone. It was just waiting for the right moment to remember how strong it could be." The business card Steve gave Maya sits framed on her bedroom wall next to a photo from that day. Maya, wearing his oversized jacket, standing between Steve and her mother, all three of them smiling through tears. And Steve Harvey learned something that day that changed how he approached every show afterward. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply listen, really listen, and create space for someone to find their voice again. Because, in the end, that's what healing sounds like. Not just the return of words, but the return of hope. Maya Rodriguez is now 19 years old and studying speech pathology in college, working toward a career helping other children who have lost their voices to trauma. She still calls Steve Harvey on her birthday every year, and their conversation always begins the same way. "Hi, Mr. Steve. Thank you for helping me remember how to talk." The jacket still hangs in her closet, too big for her, but perfect for wrapping around herself when she needs to remember that her voice matters, that her words have power, and that sometimes the most beautiful sound in the world is simply someone choosing to speak again.